So I've owned one of these Peugeot 207s, 1.4 diesel, for quite a few years. A lot has gone wrong with it over the years. A lot of the time I had to fix those things myself. And I basically learned the car inside and out by doing that, often by watching YouTube videos and winging it. But I'm just going to go over everything that has gone wrong with it in the last few years, symptoms to watch out for, quick checks you can do, and I'll go through what I did to fix it bit by bit. Now, I know these cars have a bit of a mixed reputation, and as I said, a lot has gone wrong with it, but I do really like this car for two reasons. Firstly, it's still going strong. It has 320,000 kilometers on it. It's done a ton of mileage, and it drives like a new car, really, if you look after it. The other reason is, no matter what has gone wrong with this car, it never left me stranded. I never ended up at the side of the road or having to call a tow truck, or, even when bits were falling off it, it kept driving. And it often kept driving for months. Like at one point it had a blown EGR that was whistling like a steam engine. Kept driving. Thermostat housing blew on it. I drove it on short trips after that happened, but I was doing that for about 3 weeks until I could get the thermostat fixed, or the housing fixed, because it was leaking coolant everywhere. Anyway, let's get to it. So before I get started, one of the things you would really want to check if you have one of these cars is the turbo. They have a nasty habit of, well, if they wear out, the turbine on them ends up rattling around inside in the housing, and it will act like a grenade if it finally disintegrates. So all you got to do, unscrew this. Here is your air intake. This is coming from the air filter into the turbo. PCV valve comes in here. Unscrew that, and you can wriggle it off like that. That whole pipe assembly comes off, and from there you can check the turbo. Now you can see there is a little turbine in there. You want to be able to spin that by hand. Again, you don't want to be doing this with the engine running, or even a hot engine. You lose your finger. That thing spins at phenomenal speeds. And you see it's resting on this shaft. That shaft should have no play in it. You should not be able to wiggle that around with your finger. If it wiggles more than 1.5 millimeters, it's time to replace the turbo, because you really don't want that turbine disintegrating and going up through your air intake and into your engine, because you can kiss the engine goodbye. That happens. It's happened to me with another Peugeot. So that is something very quick that you can check. That might save you a lot of heartache. So another problem that I had with this car was it was losing power slowly over the months, and it would throw up Antipollution Faulty messages on the dash, and it would go away as quickly as it came. After a lot of messing about, I discovered that the throttle body, which is this guy, was caked in dirt, and that was throwing the error, or that was causing the code. I can show you the old throttle body here. So this was the throttle body that I ended up replacing. Which way does it go? This way? Yeah, that way. The valve, the butterfly valve inside, was caked in dirt, and it was very stiff to move. Actually, you're not supposed to move these with your finger, but since this is it was kind of jerky, and it moved from side to side. It was all over the place. rather than clean it, I just decided to get a second-hand one for €40 and put it in, and that did fix the issues for a while, or at least partially. But there was a root cause to the loss of power. Now, to replace the throttle body, it's actually not that difficult of a job. You're better off cleaning it. You can get carburetor cleaner or throttle body cleaner again online, not that expensive. But if you want to replace it like I did, first you remove the earth, and you remove this harness on the boost pressure sensor. Undo this, you can wiggle this tube off, and then you have 3 hex, or are they called hex? I don't know. You have 3 of the, I think they're called torque. 1, 2, and 1 underneath. You undo them, and you can wiggle off the throttle body. The whole unit comes off, and you can put on a new one. It's probably only 20 minutes work, half an hour. So what should be happening with the air intake is air comes in here, it goes down this pipe, it goes into the back of the air box in which your air filter is in. From there, the clean air comes down here. Now I have this pipe removed because I was showing you the turbo. The clean air goes into the turbo, the exhaust gases spin the turbo, and then you have compressed air coming up through here, passes this sensor into your throttle body, which opens and closes to let in more air as needed, and then into your intake manifold, which goes down the back into the engine there. Part of it, I think part of it goes into the EGR valve. Whoever was working on it before, these 3 keep the air filter closed. As you can see here, I have wood screws and washers in, keeping it closed now. Whoever was working on it before wrecked these, and there was a big gap here at the corner. So what was happening was it was sucking in dirty air, not only dirty but hot air because it was close to the engine. And that dirty air was coming down through the air intake and dirtying up the throttle body. I actually can show you here. I had assumed every time that I gave this car to a mechanic that they were changing the air filter, but when I finally got in after trying to diagnose these problems, this is the air filter that came out of it. Now, as you can probably see, that's not going to filter anything. Probably going to make things worse. But it wasn't the culprit, because like I said, there was a gap there. A lot of the air was simply avoiding the air filter entirely and coming straight down. So the number one thing that made a difference with low power was the airflow sensors. This is your intake airflow sensor. I'll show you. It's very, very delicate. You do not want to touch that with your hand. That's the intake mass airflow sensor. You can get special airflow sensor cleaner online for probably 15 quid, and you just spray it on there and it removes all the carbon and dust and dirt. And there is a second airflow sensor which is here. This is the, I think this is called the boost pressure sensor because it's after the turbo. You can unscrew that and wiggle it out and clean it just like you clean the other one with the airflow sensor cleaner. You got to unplug the harness as well here, and the same for that one. And it's probably a good idea to remove your earth terminal on the battery too, so you don't short anything out while you're doing this. But those 2 airflow sensors, just by cleaning the 2 of them, it was like a new car. It made a massive difference. Massive. The next thing I did was I replaced the fuel filter, which is this guy. This was quite a pain. You got to take off. Well, you took off this, and then there's another pipe underneath it. And I probably should have taken out the battery, but I didn't. Then I unscrewed the air filter housing, pulled that off, and there's a harness underneath, an electrical harness, and there's an in and out pipe. And getting to the pipe at the back there, which is down around here, getting that off was quite a pain actually. Got there eventually. Oh, I decided to change the fuel filter while I was changing a bunch of other things, just because I had never known when it was actually changed. So I figured, worst case scenario, there could be 300,000 kilometers on it. So here's the harness underneath. It sits in it like that. That's your intake, that's your outtake, and it's held on just with the one screw. But getting in there, unplugging the pipes and wriggling it out, it's a kind of an aggravating job, but you'll get there eventually. Now, another problem these cars have is the EGR valve, which is your exhaust gas recycler. What it does is it takes a portion of the burnt exhaust and it routes it back into the engine to be burned a second time. It's an emissions thing, to reduce emissions. And they can give trouble on these cars, and mine did. Mine blew, and like I said earlier, I was probably driving around for 3 months with a blown EGR valve, and it made a loud whistling sound, but apart from that it was fine. You know, there's two parts to the EGR. You have the physical valve, which is stuck in the engine right at the back here. You need to take off, I think you need to take off the fuel filter, the air box, most of this piping, and you need to reach around the back, and you can, it's only held on by 2 bolts. You can get that off. It's kind of a time consuming job, and if you get it off and clean it, that often does just fine. Clean it with carburetor cleaner. There's also a solenoid that controls it. It's like an electrical part that well, when it went on mine, I just paid a mechanic to do it rather than do it myself, because I hadn't a clue at the time. Actually, I didn't even know what an EGR valve was at the time. New ones can be a bit expensive. I got a second-hand solenoid for, I think, €30 from a scrapyard, and I think I paid the mechanic another €50 to put it in. So that whole thing is back here at the back of the engine, and I would rather have EGR valve trouble than diesel particulate filter trouble like the newer cars do, because when a DPF goes, you're talking minimum 400 quid to get a reconditioned one, and up to €1,200 to get a new one and have it installed. I had a Renault Scenic that had a diesel particulate filter, and it broke my heart trying to get that thing, because people try to repair them, you know, and they don't do it properly. They pull them apart, and there's very delicate honeycomb in them, like you would see in a catalytic converter, and they stretch that honeycomb and put it back together, and 5-6 weeks later the thing melts, you know. So God, they're a nightmare, DPFs. I'd much rather have the EGR that's in this. Now, if you're getting anti-pollution faulty coming up on your dash, which happens a lot in these cars apparently, the trouble with that is it can be about 30 different things. Your best bet is to plug in an OBD scanner, which is in this car is here, and there you go. That's your OBD port there in the glove box. The one on this is a bit finicky. The anti-pollution faulty, what set it off for me was, first we had a throttle body caked in dirt. The second thing that set it off was airflow sensors caked in dust and dirt, and the root cause of both of those was a leaky airbox. So I'm just going to go over real quick the various, I suppose, fluids I used when working on the car. Dipetane. This is a fuel additive, petrol or diesel. It helps with emissions, catalytic converter, and it says here EGR filter as well, so that's what I used it for. Now, there's a recommended dose on it there, but what I did was I put half a tank of diesel in the car. I threw an entire litre of this in, and I drove it vigorously down the motorway in fourth gear for about half an hour, and that seems to have stopped some of my EGR problems. This mass airflow sensor cleaner, I had to order this online for cleaning out the airflow sensors. I think it was €15 and another fiver shipping. That was worth every penny, because cleaning the airflow sensors made a massive difference to the car. They were caked in dirt and dust. And this is Throttle Body cleaner. I got this at my local motor factors. It was about €15 as well. See it there? Throttle valve cleaner. You can clean other stuff with this as well. Anything that's has carbon on it, or anything that is dirty. It evaporates as well in about half an hour. So I use that for cleaning Throttle Body a few times. And lastly, cups of tea. You're going to need a lot of them if you own one of these. Now, I'm not sure if you can get Dipitane in countries outside of Ireland. I'm sure they probably sell it in England too. But it was it's good stuff. It did help. Cleaned out the EGR and the cat, so I can't complain. And that was only, I think, €12 for that bottle. On the subject of turbos again, if you suspect you're having trouble with your turbo, this is the last turbo that came out of it. This isn't in bad shape at all. You see this lever here? It's called your wastegate. It's activated by a vacuum. So there's a vacuum coming from the turbo which activates the wastegate, sealing that up and giving you boost. If you suspect your turbo is giving you problems, it may not be the turbo. It may simply be something as simple as a leak in the vacuum line coming from your turbo or solenoid into your wastegate actuator. Now, on some of these turbos you can move this by hand. I would have to unplug that first, the vacuum line. On others you can't. It varies wildly. But just be aware that if your turbine here is actually okay and it's not rattling around there, and you suspect that your turbo is not engaging because there's a lack of acceleration, it may very well be your wastegate actuator or the vacuum lines leading into it. So another handy thing worth knowing is often these cars will have a little spanner icon here. That's to tell you the car is due a service. Now, half the time nobody ever resets them, so I'm just going to show you how to do it real quick. So what you do is you hold down this right button, you put in the key, you turn on the ignition, and you should get a countdown on your dash that should count from 10 down to 0. And when it does that, it will reset the spanner icon. Now, it's not on this because I just reset it recently, but that's how you do it. You hold down that button, turn on the ignition, wait for the countdown to finish. Come here, Woods. Oh, look at him go. Come here, buddy. Oh, the big stretch. Big as a horse, this fella. Another common problem I have, although this is technically my own fault, is during the winter, it's a cold morning, you get in, you start the car and you pull up the wipers button to wash the windshield and nothing happens. The fuse for the sprayer is in here, and I'd say I've probably blown 3 of them from doing that on cold mornings. If the water in the washer bottle is anyway, if it's below freezing and it's sludgy or slushy or whatever, you try and wash your window It'll blow the fuse. I've done that a lot. So in the interior of the car, the only work I really had to do in here was the handbrake went dead once. It went completely, the cables inside had disconnected. Now you can pull off this, you get a flathead screwdriver and you can clip that right off. And in there you have a little 10mm bolt that you can use to tighten or loosen the handbrake. If you want to take off the whole center console, undo this. There's a nut in there. I think it's about 13mm. Pull up you can pull this up. You can just pull that right up. That means you can lift the whole lot up when it's time. And finally, these two silver parts, you need to pull them off, and you pull them back towards you. And it was a right job to actually get them off. I had to really swing out of them, but they went back on. There was no clips broken or anything. And once you do that, you have a couple, I think 10mm bolt there. So between them, the 13mm here, and pulling this up, you should be able to pull the entire center console up out. And in there, underneath here, you'll find two wires that come from each of the back wheels, and those wires will be held to the handbrake with a clip, and sometimes that clip just pops off. Well, as you can see, for a car with 320,000 kilometers on it, it's not doing too bad. Sounds okay, drives lovely if you look after it, and it's very good on diesel. I can't even remember the last time I put 50 quid into this thing. It's probably 3 weeks ago. So that's it. Hope I was able to help someone with their issues if they have one of these. They're a nice car. Anyway, that's it. Goodbye.